History tells the story of the world and of our lives. Sometimes that history goes bump in the night. Broadcasting from the center of Oddity and the supernatural in Central Florida, it's the History Goes Bump podcast.
Hello, you spectacular people. Welcome to this 581st episode of the History Goes Bump podcast, Ghost Tours for the Theater of the Mind. I am your host, Diane.
And this is Kelly.
Kelly, on this episode, we're going to Ohio, one place that we actually want to physically go to. And I have a feeling in the future we will be visiting because one of our good friends is going to be moving there.
Indeed.
We're going to the city of Akron, and we're going to look at several haunted locations there. Should be a lot of fun. After we get done talking about haunted Akron, then I'm going to address U.S. ghost adventures and tours. If you guys are interested in ghost tours and what we think about them and such, you'll want to stick around for that. There's some controversy going on in the paranormal community in regards to that, and several of our favorite haunted locations as well that they happen to own. Before we get into that, we want to welcome into the spectacular crew, Kim.
Thank you so much for joining our Facebook group.
And now, this moment in Oddity.
Diane and I are avid bird enthusiasts. We spend a good bit of money feeding the wild birds that frequent our backyard because we enjoy observing them. Recently, we came upon a very unique bird called the African Jacana. This species of bird is found in the sub-Saharan African freshwater wetlands. Swamps, marshes, and sometimes slow-moving rivers are their homes. Their species distribution spans from Senegal to Sudan and south to South Africa. Jacanas are also known as Jesus birds due to their long toes and slender legs which allow them to walk on floating vegetation, giving the illusion that they are walking on water. The Jacanas are polyandry, which means that the female mates with multiple males, and the male alone incubates the eggs and cares for the chicks once they have hatched. What is so striking about the species, however, comes into play when there is a threat to the chicks by a predator. The male Jacana will squat low and open his wings. The chicks will then run underneath the wings of the male and press against his body. The male will then close his wings and carry the chicks to a safer location. This remarkable bird looks more like something born of a nuclear waste disaster. That or possibly one of Dr. Frankenstein's creations, because while the male is carrying the chicks' legs sprawl out every which way from underneath the male's wings. The photographs that one can find online of male African Jacanas carrying their babies are bizarre, heartwarming, and above all, certainly are odd.
Those who dream by day are cognizant of many things which escape those who dream only by night. Edgar Allan Poe.
And now this month in history.
In the month of March, on the 8th in 1863, Confederate General John Mosby and his Rangers captured Union General E.H. Stoughton. John Singleton Mosby's Rangers were well known for their guerrilla-style approach and raids behind Union lines in northern Virginia during the Civil War. The Rangers were composed of 1,900 men between January 1863 and April of 1865. They were not a traditional army unit, but were still able to enjoy the plunders of war. They also were not tasked with camp duties, and the Rangers lived dispersed amongst civilian populations. Mosby's Rangers were quite successful, often being called on to strike specific targets. These were known as lightning raids in the countryside of Virginia. To this day, Mosby's 43rd Cavalry is still known in parts of Virginia's Piedmont region as Mosby's Confederacy. The night of Stoughton's capture, a light rain was falling. A raid was ordered for Fairfax, Virginia, which was known as Fairfax Courthouse at the time. Stoughton was sleeping amongst several thousand federal soldiers only a short 15-mile distance from the White House. Mosby was also known as the Gray Ghost due to his unit's ability to appear and quickly disappear, ostensibly without a trace. That night, the Gray Ghost entered the Union General's quarters after Mosby's Rangers quickly overpowered a few drowsy guards. Next, the Rangers snuck into the stables to gather horses. What took place after that is somewhat amusing. The Gray Ghost stealthily lifted the General's nightshirt and slapped Stoughton's bare bum with a sword, shocking the General awake. The following conversation is said to have gone like this. The General asked, "What is the meaning of this?" Mosby, "General, did you ever hear of Mosby?" Stoughton replied, "Yes, have you caught him?" To which the Gray Ghost stated, "I am Mosby, and I have caught you. Stewart's cavalry has possession of the courthouse. Be quick and dress." Many Union soldiers escaped into the forest after realizing that Mosby's forces were of a small number. The total list of captured were as follows: a Union general, 2 captains, 30 enlisted men, and 58 horses, all without firing a shot. When President Lincoln was advised of the news, he bemoaned, "I can make another brigadier in 5 minutes, but I can't replace those horses."
Akron is an industrial city with roots as a canal town that grew out of a swamp. It is the 5th largest city in Ohio and has a rich history connected to some of the most well-known manufacturers in the world. There is a dark side with a history of violent riots and crimes committed by the Black Hand Gang. Like all historic cities, Akron has its legends and haunted locations. Join us for the history and hauntings of Akron, Ohio.
Akron, Ohio started as an inhospitable swamp. I wouldn't think of swamp when I think of Ohio, but that's the way it was.
I wouldn't either.
Settlers to the area quickly abandoned it. This was the Cuyahoga Valley that was referred to as the Western Reserve. So you're going to hear us talking about the Western Reserve a lot in this episode. The Ohio and Erie Canal was built between the 1820s and early 1830s and connected Lake Erie and the Ohio River. Workers drained the swampland of Akron. A man named Simon Perkins founded Akron in 1825, and since it was the highest point in the county, it was named Akron, which means high in Greek.
Oh, interesting. I had no idea.
The first canal boat would launch from Akron in 1827, and the town exploded with growth. Mills and factories would be attracted to Akron because of the canal, and companies like Quaker Oats and General Mills would start here, as would many tire companies like B.F. Goodrich Tire, Firestone Tire, General Tire, and Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company. The rubber industry was so big that Akron was nicknamed the rubber capital of the world. The city would also be the center of airship development, which we love. So from canal town to industrial powerhouse. The city has many strange legends connected to it and haunted locations due to murders, riots, violence, and tragic stories. Here are some of those haunted locations. We're going to start with the ominously named River Styx Bridge.
River Styx is a pretty ominous name, and it was inspired by the River Styx of Greek mythology. It's the name of an unincorporated community and nearby river. Over the River Styx is a 75-foot-tall steel railroad trestle. On March 22, 1899, the Erie Limited No. 5 was heading west towards Chicago, with Erie Railroad engineer Alexander Wallace Logan at the helm. Logan had worked for 30 years on the rails. A bolt snapped on the bridge, and it caused the train to derail and plunge down an embankment. The train consisted of a baggage car, a day car, 2 sleeping cars, and a dining car with 79 passengers on board. The fireman on board, Byron Ward, survived and said, "I kept my eyes on Logan after he had put on the emergency, thinking I would jump if he did, but he didn't. He kept his hand on the throttle, and the last I saw of him, he was leaning out of the window, his teeth set with that grim determination so peculiar to him, his hand on the throttle, calm and determined to do all in his power to save the lives of those on the train." His efforts were not in vain. Logan was killed instantly, but the passenger cars remained upright and no one else died.
Can you imagine it plunges off that bridge and he's the only one who dies?
It's incredible.
What a hero. One of the first witnesses to the ghost train was Wayne County Coroner Dr. William Faber. He told people in October of 1899 that he saw a train that, quote, was enveloped in great clouds of dust and smoke, and huge flames of fire shot up in every direction, and immense volumes of steam making a terrific noise that shot up from the engine. And the noise of creaking timbers and breaking iron bars was plainly heard, but above all came the shrieks of those pinioned beneath the wreckage. He had a buddy in the car, and they ran toward where they saw the wreckage go, but when they reached the bridge, they found nothing. It was eerily quiet. The following year, 3 men heard a train whistle and heard the sound of a train wreck and watched it plunge into the river. They ran over, but again, no train was found. For the past century, people have reported seeing the lights of a train and billowing smoke and hearing the screams of passengers as a ghost train plummets towards the river. The bridge runs parallel to East Ohio Avenue just north of Morton Salt in Rittman, if you want to check it out.
And next we have Crybaby Bridge. There is another bridge with legends connected to it, and it carries the familiar moniker of Crybaby Bridge. The story that goes with this one dates back to the 19th century. A couple were riding in a horse-drawn carriage with their baby near Silver Creek. They were making their way down a steep hill and lost control of the carriage, and the baby was lost in the creek. Another story claims the mother committed infanticide, like in most Crybaby Bridge stories. It is said that when people stand on the bridge at midnight under a full moon, they will hear the wailing of a baby. The bridge is near the Chippewa Rogues Hollow Historical Society at 17500 Gale House Road.
Next, we have the Hale Farm and Village. This sounds really cool. I always love these old historic villages that have lots of old houses and things like that with them.
Me too.
It's like you get to see a whole bunch of museums at once. Spending time at the Hale Farm and Village is like stepping back into the 19th century. The village is located at 2686 Oak Hill Road, about 7 miles north of Akron. The farm is named for Jonathan Hale, who homesteaded the property and built the house in 1825. He had come here from Connecticut in 1810 without his family so that he could prepare a place for them. When he got to the land he purchased, he found a squatter had moved onto the land and built a log cabin. Now, one might think he would be angry about this development, but when he saw the work the man had done to clear the fields, he told the man he was welcome to stay as long as he continued to care for the land. Hale's wife and 3 children arrived a few months later, and they all would end up living in this log cabin. And I don't know how long the squatter was there for. I don't know if he stayed with the family for a while or... The permanent house that still stands today was begun in 1824 and was fashioned from clay bricks formed from clay near the Cuyahoga River. The house was designed in the Federal style and stands 3 stories. The rear of the house is built into a slope, so the first floor has no windows in the rear. I thought that was kind of weird. I don't know if they didn't have like a flat part of the land, so they're like, we'll just build it into the slope, or if they wanted to have that slope back there, maybe to keep the house cooler. That first floor has an open concept like our modern homes, with a great room that has a dining room, living room, and kitchen. So they were way ahead of their time.
Indeed.
The second floor had another dining room that was more formal and a parlor. Eventually, the dining room became a bedroom. The third floor had 6 small bedrooms with no fireplaces. When I read that, I went, yikes. Talk about freezing in the winter.
Oh, Diane.
How can you be in Ohio and not have fireplaces?
No heat register for you to sit your little booty on?
I know. I mean, they had nothing. I'd be like making a little campfire in my bedroom. Later years found those rooms being redesigned as larger bedrooms. The Hale family called their home Old Brick.
The Hale son, Andrew, stayed on the property after he married, and he built a small house across from Old Brick. This home eventually was moved to become the south wing of Old Brick. A north wing was built later for storage. We're not sure when the wings were added, but probably after 1854 when Jonathan died and Andrew moved his family into Old Brick. Andrew ran the Hale farm until his death in 1884. Andrew's son, Charles Oviatt, decided to turn the house into an inn for city dwellers to enjoy on the weekends and for summer tourists. Charles died in 1938 and his niece Clara inherited the house. When she died in 1953, she donated the property to the Western Reserve Historical Society so they could open Old Brick as a museum. That house is the central focus of a property that now contains 34 historic structures, 8 of them built by 3 generations of the Hale family, and runs as an outdoor living history museum. In 2008, Sandvik Architects restored Old Brick. Visitors can learn about spinning and weaving and see demonstrations of glass blowing, pottery making, and blacksmithing.
There is a one-room cabin in the village that had been built by Jonathan Fritch in 1805. When the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company moved onto the property that Fritch had owned, they used the cabin as a fishing and hunting cabin for clients. In 1995, they donated the cabin to the village, and it's used as a representation of the cabin that the Hales lived in for their first 17 years on their farm, because of course that one did not survive.
Another house on the property is the 1832 Goldsmith House that was designed by architect Jonathan Goldsmith in the Greek Revival style for the William Pick Robinson family. The family of 6 arrived from New Haven, Connecticut to Willoughby, Ohio in 1820. They were a wealthy family, as William had owned several mills. The house is the most luxurious one on the property and was donated and moved here from Willoughby in 8 sections in 1973 and reopened in 1985. This is the most haunted building on the property. Staff claim to see a female apparition on the 2nd floor, whom they believe is Carolyn Robinson, the wife of William Robinson. William, unfortunately, had died before the house was finished. A volunteer at the house claimed to see an impression on a bed, as though someone unseen was lying on the bed. The indentation went away as they approached the bed.
The Herrick house was brought over to the Hale farm stone by stone and reconstructed.
Oh my word.
The house is named for Jonathan E. Herrick, who had built it in 1845 in Twinsburg. Herrick was an early settler to the town, and he came to the Western Reserve after his brothers had success there. He married Phyla Clark, and they had 5 children. The house was designed in the Greek Revival style and has a unique square-cut stone structure. Phyla died in 1889, and Jonathan died in 1898, and at that time the house was willed to Anna Simmons, who'd been an employee of the family. I thought that was kind of cool. Gave it to the employee. The house passed down through the Simmons family. It was decided to build an industrial park where the house sat, and so it was slated for demolition in 1981. A grant and donation made it possible for the Hale farm to acquire the house. So basically, that last member of the Simmons family had offered it to Hale farm, and she said, but you have to pay to move it. So they went and got a grant and a donation so they could do that. It took 20 truckloads to move the stones. It took years before rebuilding. It's like they took all the stones there and just left them in a pile because they didn't have the money then to reconstruct it. Although all of the stones were marked, so it was like putting a puzzle together.
Oh my goodness.
But the house was finished and opened in 1989. Since Jonathan Herrick had been a dairy farmer, the new site of the house has been interpreted as a working dairy farm with a barn, fenced animal paddocks, and land for gardens and barnyard animals. Cheese was a big deal in the Western Reserve, and it got the nickname Cheesedom.
Now I want some cheese. We haven't had breakfast yet.
It's just funny because I always think of Wisconsin as the place for cheese. But
of course.
Employees claim that objects move around the house when it's closed. People have seen a male apparition walking around inside the house, and this is thought to be Jonathan.
The Jagger House was built in 1845 by Clement Jagger, who is a prosperous carriage maker in Bath, Ohio. The house was designed in the Greek Revival style, and the interior features hand-carved paneling and stenciling. The house was relocated in 1962 and is presented as part of the farm village that is named Wheatfield Township. The house is set up as the home and office of Dr. William Tibbles and his family. A former volunteer at the house reported this experience. The most frightening house at Hale by far is the Jagger House. This house itself hates. You walk in and it feels like the house would just drop down on you if it could. I hated to work in that house, even during the day. And whoever worked there would become hateful the entire day. You just could not help it. If you stayed in the house for just a few minutes, you just hated everything and everyone. People that worked at that house together would be arguing constantly.
So it makes you wonder why. It's just they moved the house from somewhere else. Is the family upset about that, or what happened?
It's bizarre.
Anyway, it sounds like a very cool historic location to check out. Next, we have Stan Highwet Hall. One of the finest examples of Tudor Revival architecture in America is Stan Highwet Hall, and it is one of the largest homes in America, not just Ohio.
Oh, my word.
This is a huge, Kelly, it is gorgeous. It looks like something that would have been out of The Fall of the House of Usher, that show.
Oh.
Something like that. This is a huge 65-room stone mansion that was built for Goodyear Tire and Rubber magnate F.A. Sieberling between 1911 and 1915. That's how big it is. It took 4 years to build. The property is on 70 acres with sprawling gardens designed by Warren H. Manning. The house cost $150,000 to build, and architect Charles S. Schneider was tasked with designing it. A spur had to be added to the railroad to bring all the supplies out. So they built a special little railroad just so they could bring that stuff out. The interior decorator was Hugo F. Huber of New York, and he brought much of the furnishings from New York. Other pieces came from England. The inside of the mansion featured 23 fireplaces, hand-carved oak, sandalwood, and black walnut paneling, a Gothic Revival conservatory, and 21,455 panes of glass. There's a lot of windows. The formal dining room could seat 40 people, and there was an indoor pool. The Sieberlings named their home Stan Highway, which means stone quarry in Old English, because of old quarries on the property. For 40 years, the Sieberlings lived in Stan Highway Hall, and many of their things remain, like the Aeolian organ in the music room. This room featured entertainment from the likes of Will Rogers and Shirley Temple.
Oh my, how fun.
Let's have somebody come over for the night and entertain our guests. Let's get Shirley Temple. The Sieberling children eventually donated the house to the Stan Highway Hall Foundation, and it is run as a museum today, one that occasionally hosts ghost tours.
The ghost here is referred to as the Lady in Gray. This could either be Gertrude Sieberling, F.A.'s wife, or possibly an attachment to some of the furnishings brought over from an English mansion. The spirit usually hangs out in the master bedroom or the Great Hall. A staff member claims that after a Christmas tour, he was locking down the mansion when he saw something out of the corner of his eye. When he looked, he saw the gray lady crossing the balcony overlooking the Great Hall. She was heading towards Gertrude's bedroom.
And now a little break for a word about one of our sponsors. Next, we have the Wolf Creek Tavern. Wolf Creek Tavern serves up food, libations, and live music. And there is a speakeasy here that is open on the weekends as a throwback to an era when the building had a speakeasy in the basement during Prohibition.
How fun.
Yeah, the original carved chestnut 1840s bar is still here.
Gorgeous.
This tavern is located 10 miles southwest of Akron and Norton at 3044 Wadsworth Road. Irishman Shane Moore and his wife Amy opened Wolf Creek in 2013. Amy had visited a previous tavern here when she was a child, so she was familiar with it. And let me just throw in a cute little story about them. So anyway, Shane comes over from Ireland, and I believe he was doing a bike tour across the United States. And one of the places he stopped in was Norton, and he met Amy at some point or whatever. And he decided, I think I'm in love with that girl. I'm going to stay here. And so that's what they've done. They got married and stayed in Norton, and that's basically where she grew up. So he came to her hometown and...
Forget the bike tour.
Well, actually, he did finish the bike tour, but then he came back for her.
Ah.
The original building was built in 1840 and ran as possibly a blacksmith shop and then a tavern. In 1858, it became H. Bechtel's Cabinet Shop. By 1874, it was the Loyal Oak House that ran as a hotel with a bar. Jack Lozier and his mother bought the building in 1911 and continued to run the hotel. The name changed in the 1930s to Adams Place in honor of the new owner, Adam Pinter. Other uses of the building were as a sheriff's office, jail, and children's infirmary. Staff and patrons at the restaurant claim to see shadow figures and to have been touched by something they can't see. A female apparition in a long black dress has been seen. There's a male apparition as well that people believe belongs to a bartender from the late 1800s named Ray Wilhelm. Martini glasses go flying down in the speakeasy all by themselves.
And now on to the Perkins Stone Mansion, which was built by Simon Perkins in 1835. His father, General Simon Perkins, was the founder of Akron. The house sat on 115 acres that has been whittled down to 2.5 acres today. The hill it sat upon was nicknamed Mutton Hill because it was used for sheep grazing. The house was designed by Isaac Ladd in the Greek Revival and Federal styles and features a 2-story portico. Hand-cut yellow sandstone was quarried from nearby as the building material, hence the word stone in the name. The house remained in the family until 1945 and is owned and operated by the Summit County Historical Society of Akron today. The site not only has the family home, but the original wash house, where linens and clothing were washed and dried, and also the original well. The woodshed behind the house is the Historical Society's office. A reconstructed outhouse, gazebo, and carriage house complete the property that runs as a historical house museum. People claim to have seen, felt, and heard the spirits of cats and dogs. Ghost cats rub up against ankles. Full-bodied apparitions are seen in period clothing, and these include both adults and children. The children are often seen running around the table. Floorboards are heard creaking under disembodied footsteps, and chiming bells are also heard. Mysterious lights have been seen, and indentations are seen on beds and pillows. One woman claimed she felt something unseen touch her hair, and another woman claimed to have something unseen breathe on her neck. That is something I haven't felt. I've had my hair messed with, but I haven't felt anything breathe on me.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to. Next, we have the Akron Civic Theater. This is located at 182 South Main Street and started out as the Lowe's Theater, being a part of the Lowe's chain of theaters run by founder Marcus Lowe. This was one of 11 and is the only one that still remains. It also is one of only 5 atmospheric theaters that were designed by John Eberson that still survives. Our listeners are more than familiar at this point, I think, Kelly, with what an atmospheric theater was. They were meant to give patrons the feeling that they were outside, with night sky murals painted on the ceilings and twinkling lights to symbolize stars. A lot of them had these ceilings where the clouds would kind of float over the sky area and that kind of thing. The theater is also one of a very few that have a rotating ceiling. The original plan for the theater, though, started with dance hall owner Oscar Beck. He planned a 3,000-seat theater that would anchor what he called the Hippodrome. There would be 30 stores and restaurants along the arcade. Construction began in 1919, but the project went bankrupt in 1921 with only the lobby completed.
Marcus Lowe came through Akron in 1925 and decided to bring one of his theaters to the abandoned project. He hired John Eberson to design it, and construction was completed in 1929. The exterior had a terracotta facade, and the interior was made to resemble a Moorish castle with Mediterranean decor made up of Italian alabaster sculptures and medieval carvings. The theater is home to a full-size Wurlitzer theater organ. The Kelly Operating Company leased the theater in 1964 and were later bought out by the Akron Jaycees in 1965 when it was proposed to turn the theater into a parking lot. Live theater came back to the theater at this time because the Women's Guild got involved with the operations of the theater, and they were not only ushers, but they invested in the building of a concession stand and brought in famous celebrities to act in the plays. The theater was renovated for $19 million from 2001 to 2002 and reopened with a performance by Tim Conway.
When you see the inside of this theater and you think they were going to turn this into a parking lot, this place is gorgeous inside. They've done a remarkable job with the renovation and such. There are said to be 3 spirits at the theater. The first is the spirit of a girl who allegedly committed suicide by jumping into the canal behind the theater. People have heard her weeping uncontrollably and have seen her ghost walking along the canal. They're not sure if she's actually related to the theater or that she might have died before the theater was built there. Apparently the theater, I think it goes all the way across the canal, like over the top of it.
Oh, wow.
There's also the ghost of Fred, the janitor. He had worked at the theater for a very long time and is seen in all different places inside the theater. His spirit is very protective and has run off vandals in the past.
I love that.
So I don't know if they've, arrested these guys and they're like, well, it was that dude there. He was really mean. According to Weird US, Fred also apparently has no tolerance for people who disrespect his beloved theater, especially the bathrooms. In fact, Fred's ghost is said to get so angry over people messing up his bathrooms that he will sometimes chase or attack you if he catches you doing anything other than answering the call of nature in the restrooms.
What else would you be doing unless, a booty call or something?
Have you seen the movie Liar, Liar with Jim Carrey?
Okay.
He destroyed that restroom.
You're terrible.
And then there's some people who, if you are answering the call of duty, you might be destroying the restroom as well. The balcony has the spirit of an unknown man who is seen wearing a black tuxedo complete with coattails. So I don't know if he died during a performance and now he's there or who that is. Next, we have the Hauer House.
The Hauer House Museum is a glorious Victorian mansion that was built in 1871 by John Henry Hauer.
I always write glorious Victorian mansion, aren't they all?
Absolutely.
But it's like I looked at this one and if I gasp, I'm like, oh, it's so beautiful.
It's glorious. He had made his fortune in the milling, reaping, and cereal industries. Hauer was so involved in the economy of Akron that he was called the father of Akron industry. He and his wife Susan had come to Akron from Doylestown in 1865 and started design and construction on their 3-story Second Empire Italianate-style mansion almost immediately. The architect was Jacob Snyder, and the finished product featured a tower topped by a distinctive mansard roof and 28 rooms. The first floor had 2 parlors, a library, music room, office, dining room, and kitchen. The second floor had 4 bedrooms and 2 sitting rooms. The third floor had storage, a drawing room, picture gallery, and large ballroom. The Howers collected furnishings and art from around the world, and these are part of the museum today.
In 1901, John moved to a smaller home near the mansion with his second wife, and his son Milton moved into the mansion with his wife Blanche. Every time I hear that name, I think Golden Girls.
Absolutely.
Father and son both died in May of 1916, and Blanche remained in the mansion. Her daughter Grace came to live with her, and she remained in the house until it was deeded to the University of Akron in 1970. In the mid-1980s, the mansion was opened as a museum. It is thought that the spirit here is John's first wife, Susan, and that she's angry. Apparently, as Susan was lying on her deathbed, she made John promise her that he wouldn't remarry, which I always think is very cruel. Don't make somebody promise that. He held on for 4 years, but then he did remarry, and Susan ain't having it. It is said that she glares out from her portrait on the wall. Heavy doors open and slam shut. A security guard once heard an audible voice yell out, "Get out of my house." Many people feel very uncomfortable in the house. Next, we have John Tidrow's ghost.
There is a legend about a grisly slaying that is connected to the Botsum Cemetery. Botsum Cemetery is located at the corner of Yellow Creek and West Bath Roads. This is 5 miles north of Akron. A man named John A. Botsum is connected to this legend. Botsum was born in Germany in 1835 to a family that owned woolen mills along the Rhine River in Germany. His father decided to flee Germany with his 5 sons to prevent them from being drafted into the German army during the Napoleonic Wars. The boat they took to America was boarded by pirates who robbed the passengers of everything. So when the Botsum family landed in New York City, they had nothing. Then a dishonest agent tried to sell the family into slavery in South America. A new friend made John aware of the danger and helped him get his family to Ohio, where they arrived in 1836. The family took in boarders and John worked construction. In 1876, his son, John A., bought a farmstead that he later transferred to his brother Conrad, and this is today the Conrad Botsum Farmstead that is run by the National Park Service. A town named Botsum sprang up around the family and featured a store, blacksmith shop, warehouse, post office, and hotel. The Botsum Depot opened in 1880. There was a large ballroom in the upper floor of the hotel that hosted dances and talent shows. In 1882, there was a dance being hosted at the hotel, and a drunk farmhand from the Botsum farmstead named John Tidrow was being belligerent to guests. One of these guests was a man named John Brooke, and when the men tussled, Brooke's jacket was torn. His way of handling the issue was to grab an axe and hit Tidrow in the head. This killed him instantly.
I guess you don't tear that man's suit. I was like, what in the world?
He was a little bit cranky about it.
And I want to know, of course, this is a legend. I don't know if this even actually happened, but was there an axe just sitting there in the ballroom?
Tidrow was buried at Botsum Cemetery, but he didn't stay there for long. Medical students grave robbed the body, and this left his spirit at unrest. The legend claims that his lurching, disembodied footsteps are heard after dark, and people claim to see the full-bodied apparition of a man with a bleeding head wandering about the woods.
I mean, of course, I guess he could have followed him outside and then found an axe outside because all these homes had those, so maybe it happened outside, not in the actual ballroom. Next, we have the Wingfoot Lake Hangar. Kelly, you and I, we love our airships.
We sure do.
And Akron is home to an airship hangar, and more importantly, to the famous Goodyear blimp.
Oh, nice.
So if you've watched a football game, you have seen the Goodyear blimp, and this is where it is stored. Suffield is 13 miles east of Akron and has the Wingfoot Lake Airship Hangar at 841 Wingfoot Lake Road. The hangar was built in 1917 and used by the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company to construct and maintain their fleet of advertising blimps. The company also built blimps for the U.S. Navy during World War I and II. The first class of Navy airship pilots were trained at the site. Today, the hangar is still the center of operations for the Goodyear blimp. Now, there's a strange story connected to all this and to this certain kind of blimp. Lieutenant Ernest D. Cody and Ensign Charles E. Adams were piloting a Navy airship off the coast of San Francisco in 1942 when the men disappeared. The blimp drifted to shore where it was found without pilots. Police and military personnel investigated the crash site and found the gondola doors hanging open. The pilots would have walked away unscathed, but a search of the area didn't find them. A search was made on land, air, and sea and was abandoned after a few days. Authorities at first surmised that the men had bailed out of the airship, but all 3 parachutes and a rubber life raft were found aboard the gondola. and those most certainly would have been employed. No distress call had been made either. There was no damage that would have come from an attack, like bullet holes or signs of fire. The theory that eventually landed for good was that the two men had discovered an oil slick on the water and stopped to investigate it and send up a smoke marker. To do that, the hatch had to be opened, and then it was believed one of the men fell out, and the other attempted a rescue and fell out as well. That's officially what they came down on, but some people have made up some other stories or come up with some other theories. Some people believe that the men had been captured by the Japanese, and then, of course, there's always aliens.
Get in the ship, we're doing butt stuff.
You're going to get out of the airship and get in our ship. Cody and Adams were declared legally dead in 1943. The gondola was stored for decades at Wingfoot Lake before being donated in 2003 to the National Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola, Florida. They called them the Phantom Crew. Where did they go? We'll never know. The blimp was nicknamed the Ghost Blimp. And then finally we have the Oriana House.
Oriana House is a residential correction center at 222 Power Street in Akron. From 1930 until 1960, it was run as a Summit County Detention Center. During that time, a crime took place here that has led to paranormal activity. It was the weekend after Thanksgiving, and the facility was understaffed with 3 adult attendants. Eula was a firm disciplinarian with a good heart, and she brought ice cream for the girls in her dormitory on the 2nd floor. She left and returned before bedtime to see if anyone needed anything. 5 of the girls, ranging in age from 14 to 17, jumped Eula, stole her keys, tied her with belts, and stuffed an ammonia-soaked cloth in her mouth. They smashed a window with a shovel and crawled out into a snowstorm. The girls were clad in thin dresses and tried to hotwire a car, which didn't work.
Apparently one of the girls said, "Oh, yeah, I know how to get a car started, no problem." And they get out there and they're like, "Okay, do it." "Oh, I don't actually know."
Eula was found suffocated, and the girls were all caught later.
If they just put a rag in her mouth, she would have been fine, but the ammonia is what killed her.
They were charged with first-degree murder, but the grand jury changed it to manslaughter, and the girls pleaded guilty and were given from 1 to 20 years. She had just given them ice cream, for crying out loud.
When this woman passed away, like her funeral, there were girls who had stayed under her charge that came to the funeral and were like, "She changed my life. She was like another mother to me. She was a good person." And it's hard to find those in these detention centers for teenagers.
All were out by 1960. For decades after the crime, staff in the building reported strange phenomena that included windows opening and closing on their own and televisions turning themselves on and off. Disembodied footsteps would follow people in the hallways, and the sound of furniture scraping, as if it was being moved, would be heard coming from empty rooms. One deputy in 1989 remarked that they weren't worried about the ghosts because she's a good ghost. I feel good she's here. She watches over us.
Akron has a long and successful industrial history. Much of the landscape here was built by members of industry, and many of their spirits remain. And there are clearly some interesting legends connected to the Ohio city as well. Are these places in Akron, Ohio haunted? That is for you to decide. Lots of great places to check out. If you've been to any of them, let us know. And if you've had any strange experiences there, we'd love to know as well. Love to have you check out our website at historygoesbump.com. And if you'd like to send us some feedback, you can do that at historygoesbump@gmail.com.
And just so the newer listeners know, if you ever want to share a story and do it anonymously, you don't have to include your name.
No, we are happy to not include your name if you don't want us to. And I don't usually throw your last name in anyway. We did hear from Amanda, who wrote under our YouTube video for the Thackeray Medical Museum, which we just did. I actually have one of those Cresseline Vapo lamps.
So cool.
Yeah, when my grandma passed away, we found it stashed away. Grandma had written a note and put it inside the box saying that when she was 6 and her sister 4, they both had the whooping cough really bad. Their mother was also having a baby, so they were staying with their grandmother until they were well. Grandma's note says that their aunt had come over to see them, and Grandma was so excited she went running out to see her, had a coughing fit, and passed out. She remembered waking up and smelling the fumes from the vapor lamp. She also included a postcard that her dad had sent to his sister, announcing the birth of their newest son and telling how the girls were both so sick with the whooping cough, staying with their grandmother, and how worried he was about them. Kind of insignificant, but very cool piece of family history. If you haven't looked them up to see what they look like, do. They are very interesting. Mine has a very ornate, I'm assuming brass stem that holds the little saucer for the vapors up above the wick of the lamp. So I thought that was a really neat little treasure for the family too, and a cool story. And even though I was like, why would you use something like that with coal tar or whatever? Apparently it did the trick.
They are very cool looking.
Oh, yeah. Kelly Googled it, and yeah, some of them can be pretty ornate there. Yeah, I bet a lot of people look at those and go, what in the world is that?
Yeah, it looks like a little gas lamp, and then there's a saucer at the top that I would imagine you put the tar in.
Yeah, and maybe they use something different later on. I don't know.
Could be.
And then under the Sorrel Weed House, which we did for episode 243, hi, my friends and I were on vacation in Savannah this week. There were 8 of us. Some of us were total skeptics, me, and some were believers. We stayed at 12 West Harris, literally having no clue about the Sorrel Weed House. I know that seems naive, but we were there to explore the city and the beach. Definitely not ghosts, but here's what happened. We were all downstairs together, only going up in groups or pairs. There was no way anyone could be upstairs without our knowledge. It began when my husband asked if I'd been in the top floor kitchen because the drawers were open. I told him that I had not been, but he said he'd closed them anyway. He immediately went back upstairs to retrieve his final items, and the same drawers were open again. For the next 45 minutes, these events happened. This was all on checkout day, not at all during the week. None of us had any strange encounters until the last day. No drawers had been opened and nothing moved. Number 1. Drawers on small hallway decorative tables were closed and then became opened. Then we closed. Then they became open again several times, sometimes different drawers, opened not by any of us. 2. Cabinets that were closed multiple times and then opened again, not by any of us. 3. A deadbolted door and deadbolted linen closet, to neither of which any of us had the key, became opened, not by any of us. 4. Fully closed bedroom door opened, not by any of us. 5. A very heavy baby carriage, which is in itself horrifying, moved a solid 2 feet towards my bed after we vacated our room, again, not by any of us.
Yeesh.
And 6. A distinct 3-hit knock made, not by any of us. And there's that typical 3 knocks. After doing research, when we got home, we learned of Matilda and Molly's deaths. I kid you not, one of our guests' names was Molly. Also learned that the suicides are likely to have happened at 12 West, next door to Sorrel, not Sorrel as many think. Seriously, an amazing and incredibly bizarre experience. This went on for around 45 minutes to an hour. I am still in shock, and I'm more shocked the more I learn about the history of these homes. I am not upset or frightened, just amazed. We would love to hear if anyone has any similar experiences or more info to help us comprehend what happened.
What a cool experience.
And then, as promised, I want to talk a little bit about this controversy that's going on with U.S. Ghost Adventures. Some of you may care, some of you may not, but I know we are the Ghost Tour podcast. There's no podcast out there like us.
Correct.
So one of the things we get asked all the time is when our listeners are going to different locations, what ghost tour do you recommend? And if there's one thing we have here at History Ghost Bump, it's integrity. So when we tell you guys we experienced something on a ghost hunt, we hope that you believe us because we're not going to lie about it. We try to get as accurate histories as we possibly can. And when it comes to a ghost tour, if we enjoy it, we'll let you know. If we don't, we'll let you know that as well. And if it's a place that we haven't been to, usually what I'll do is peruse the different ghost tours in the area if there's more than one. And then I'll tell the listener, well, if we were going to be going there, this is the ghost tour I would take. I don't know if it's any good, but I have different things that I look for when I'm looking into a ghost tour. Number 1, if there's more than one, is this like a small mom and pop operation that cares about history? That's the first one I'm always going to go for.
Absolutely.
Then I'll look over at some reviews and see what people have to say. A lot of the time when people have a really good experience, they don't say anything. If they have something bad to say, that's when they'll say something. I usually try to steer clear of what I would call franchise kind of ghost tours.
Definitely.
Now, there are some bigger ones in cities like Bulldog Tours over in Charleston.
Sure.
We love them, and they do all varieties of things there. So I will recommend them because we've always had a good time with them. I went on a Ghost and Gravestones in Boston, and it's the worst one I've ever been on, so I've never done another one. Maybe they're okay, but they're in a lot of different cities. I think there's Ghost City Tours is in a bunch of cities. And then there's this other one that seems to be building an empire here. And we mentioned them when we did our redux on the Lizzie Borden house, because as we're doing the reduxes, we're updating to what's going on with ownership. Are there new haunting experiences? And in the time since we had done Lizzie Borden the first time, which was basically 10 years, the female owner there had passed away, which was really sad to find out because she was so good for that house. And then this guy had bought it, and we didn't really know a whole lot about him, but I knew when I was doing research that there were these websites that would keep popping up with experiences and pretty, not a lot of detail to the history and stuff, and I didn't always trust them. But I would sometimes grab some of the ghost experiences I would see. But I started noticing they looked different on the top, but when you get to the bottom and it was to go on a ghost tour, it was this U.S. Ghost Adventures. And I'm like, what? Why is this on all these different websites? Well, then I realized, as I was looking at this guy who had bought the Lizzie Borden house, that he had all these ghost tours in all these cities. And at that time, it was like 80 of them. And then he also bought the Villisca Axe Murder House. And now I've heard that he's bought the Lalaurie Mansion in New Orleans. And he's kind of made a joke of these things. So they had like axe throwing at the Lizzie Borden house. And I'm like, doesn't that kind of disrespect what happened there? I mean, some people died. We noticed at the Villisca Axe Murder House that they were kind of treating it like a bed and breakfast and that you could rent out the rooms, which we couldn't understand because there were 2 rooms that you could put doors on and not have people go in there. But the parents' area was just like at the top of the stairs. So you'd be going through there no matter what to get to the other bedroom in the upstairs area. It's not a very big house. And like the Conjuring house has been bought by this other woman and she's charging like $1,500 to $2,000 a night. It's just ridiculous what some of these companies are doing and they're shooting themselves in the foot. Anyway, I wasn't happy to see that this guy is building this empire because when you have something big like this that's going into all these different cities, it's pushing out the mom and pops, which is exactly what is happening. Well, what really got my attention is that I'd seen this thing that looked like Johnny Hauser had been fired from the Villisca Axe Murder House. Johnny Hauser's been there for, I would say, decades.
He is Villisca. He
Yeah.
cares about that house more than anybody.
Yeah, so I was like, why would you fire him? That's just crazy. And then we got this email. Kelly, we get these offers all the time. I call them business, quote unquote, emails. And there's apps, there's software, there's people who want to help you get more listeners and get more followers. And here I can help you with SEO and all this other crap. And I usually just trash most of it. The first thing I look for when they send me one of these is, do they address us by name? Because it's pretty easy to figure out that I'm Diane.
And I'm Kelly.
So, if you're going to address me about something, probably use our names and, make it more personal. Anyway, this email just came and said, hello, I saw on your webpage that you have this link to this ghost tour, and I was wondering if you would replace it with our link. And then it tried to pretend like it was just a small little Savannah ghost tour.
Veteran owned and
Yeah, we're
operated.
veteran owned.
Making it sound like a little mom and pop, the way it was worded.
First of all, I'm not going to do that, period, because I don't do that kind of thing. I'm not going to take a link out and then replace it with something else. But I was like, well, Savannah, I've been on like 4 or 5 different tours there. You've done, I think, 3.
Yeah, and not to mention we have a friend that is doing a startup one. So
ready to start her own. So if
Yep.
there's somebody I'm going to be promoting, it's going to be her. So I already was like, well, I'm not going to do this. Well, I get down to the bottom of the email and it went on about why they're so great and all this stuff. And I get to the bottom and then underneath his name, U.S. Ghost Adventures. And I went, this isn't some little veteran-owned tour company, mom and pop. Give me a break. And then I was like, and how dare you ask me to replace a link? If you want me to add a link, I'll look at it. And of course, they offered us, we could give you an affiliate link if you'd like, so you can make some money off of it, or we'll give you a free ghost tour. Now, I'm not going to say no to a free ghost tour. Although I will say, I don't believe we've ever done a free ghost tour. I don't think I've ever done that. And even if you do give me the ghost tour for free, it does not mean I'm going to give you a good review. I'm not bought.
that is true.
And paid
No.
for. So if it was bad, I would let people know that it was bad. So I was like, what in the world? So I trashed it and didn't think anything about it. Well, then, of course, he follows up and, says, hey, have you looked at this? And I trashed that again. Well, then I started seeing chatter going on in the paranormal community, talking about Johnny Hauser being fired and people wanted to boycott Villisca Axe Murder House. And then I started seeing that people were posting, hey, these small, like Baltimore ghost tours. Said, we've been told by several people that we have relationships with that they've been approached to replace links that they have to us on their web pages or websites for U.S. Ghost Adventures. And it's popping up all over the place. And you're hearing it from all these little tour companies. And then I started hearing that they would send, I'm not going to get into all the specifics because I don't want to get us into any legal trouble. But let's just say some of their tactics are not on the up and up. And I actually went back to the trashed email and responded to it because then I was upset. And I was just like, I've heard about the shady stuff that you guys have going on here, and we do not participate in this kind of thing. And by the way, if you're going to run a business and approach people, try to get to know what you're talking about, because the way that they approached it was like, we just had this blog and they wanted us to change the link on it. I'm like, this blog are our scripts for our 9 million downloaded podcast. And by the way, maybe you should get to know the host names. Another business tip for you before you approach them.
Yes.
So I didn't get a response to it. But anyway, let me just say, if you are in a city and the only ghost tour there is U.S. Ghost Adventures and you really want to do one, have at it. But if there is a small mom and pop, that is the one I would go with all the time.
Definitely.
I want to thank you guys for joining us on this episode. I've been your host, Diane.
And this has been Kelly.
You take care now.
Bye-bye.
This episode is brought to you by our executive producers.
Dispatches from the Grave Digger.
We want to thank Stephanie for raising her contribution. We're going to be moving you into a chest tomb.
Thank you so much for supporting History Goes Bump. We really could not produce this show without our executive producers.
Want to keep the spooks away? Give us a review.
Do you have your morning voice on?
I do.
You sound more and more like Mort every day.
Swamps, marshes, and sometimes slow mooing. It's a mooing river.
Moo.
To this day, Mosby's 43? His 43 cavalry. The rubber industry was so big that Akron was nicknamed the rubber capital of the world. And it's probably a good thing that rubber meant what it did back then instead of what it might mean today.
Diane. Us and our 13-year-old boy brain.
There you go.
Botzum was born in Germany.
Now you sound like our bird.
I know.